Hey everybody, I'm Nate,
And I'm John.
and welcome back to Casual Theology. And if you're as surprised to see a video so soon as we are,
There you go. That's it.
also if you're surprised to see a different background, our church library is. Oh, sorry, I accidentally.
What?
I accidentally drooled on you.
You. Okay.
Sorry.
We should edit that out.
If you're,
This is casual, remember? So,
Yeah.
whatever.
if you're surprised to not see our church library behind us, that's because it's being used right now.
Yep. So we decided to film up here. This is just another classroom in our church. And, really, the background doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I like the illusion that we're very well read and we've actually read every book that was behind us so that you think we're geniuses or something. But that's all right. So,
No, we're just a couple of guys.
yeah, that's it. We're here to talk about abortion some more. We had a first part, and now we're doing a second part.
And we kind of noticed when we were looking back at the video we just posted that we dealt a lot with how the church views abortion, some of both the good ways and the bad ways we view and stigmatize it.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, it's with theology, what the Bible says and how it's interpreted.
But then also just in church culture outside Scripture as well.
Yeah, a little bit. We touched on that. But then we kind of closed with this idea of, well, what about adoption? And
that brought up the idea of us using the second part to just toss around ideas about how the church and, frankly, the nation as a whole even could approach this topic.
Yeah. So there is a clear, what's the word I'm looking for, a value in Christianity of adoption. Adoption is a good thing, a high value. Biblically and theologically, it's something that is a blessed thing to do. It's something that glorifies God because you're taking a child, the most vulnerable members of our society, and you're taking them under your wing, under your headship and leadership, and you're providing for them. You're sacrificing for them, and that's a loving act. It's a self-sacrificial love, and it's a great example of that. My own wife is adopted. I don't know if you
Really?
knew that.
I did not know that.
She was adopted at the age of 13.
So is my girlfriend.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, and actually both of those situations are similar because they weren't actually in the foster care system. I don't know if your girlfriend was, but
Maybe I'll ask her
she
sometime.
might have been for a little while. But they were adopted by people who were either family or connected to family, and that's my wife's story. Was she was adopted without ever having been in the foster care system. There was somebody close to her family, close to her sister, who adopted her, and so. I have a high regard for adoption.
And I think adoption kind of gets sort of swept under the rug in just the larger culture.
Yeah.
Outside. It's not promoted as much as it perhaps should be.
Yeah. But one of the things that I've heard leveled against Christians in the church is if you care so much about all of these babies, why don't you just adopt them? And it's a weird.
Why don't we?
Well, it's a little bit of an odd statement because they're looking at two different statistics. One is lots and lots and lots of people are in the foster care system in our country and are not being adopted, have not been adopted, may not get adopted. None of them are babies. The babies are on waiting. There's waiting lists for people that want to adopt babies. And so when we're talking about abortion, it looks like if there were less abortions, there would be, and women were willing to carry their baby to term and have the baby and put it up for adoption, one of two things would happen. One, the baby would be adopted right away because, like, even before it was born, it would have a home ready for it because there's such a big waiting list in virtually every place around the country. Second thing that could happen is the mom could change her mind. And that actually happens quite a lot with women who are pregnant and going to have a baby, and they're ready to give it up for adoption, and then the day comes and they just can't do it because there's a bond there. And that bond is important, and we want to celebrate that. So that is one answer to that question.
And we were talking Saturday, Sunday about other ideas that like alternatives.
Mm-hmm.
Like we said in our last video, if there are any like reproductive scientists watching this video, please figure out a way to maybe transfer developing embryos somewhere else.
Or to use a completely geek term, if you can compensate for the Heisenberg principle and just beam them out with a transporter beam and put them somewhere else where they would be viable and grow, that'd be great. Also probably impossible, but...
Well, maybe the transporter beam.
There are other ways to do it without using transporter technology.
Let's hope.
There might not be
get
yet,
on that.
but yeah, that
get
would
on
be...
it.
But even then, you have there's all sorts of ethical issues that get raised depending on how you're going to do that. But the question I think that we need to talk about is what is the church's right response to the people who would be considering getting an abortion? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think we might have touched on it a little bit in our last video, because part of the reason, part of the reason why so many, even within the church, consider it is because of the stigma that gets placed on unplanned pregnancy.
Yes.
I think if the church were to make a concerted effort to drop that stigma, and maybe that's only going to happen when the older generation starts shrinking. I know that sounds very callous of me to say, but I don't know. Maybe it can happen without that. Maybe it can happen sooner, but
it's an interesting point, because when I was your age and even younger than you in high school, I had the same thought that this is an old people problem, that they're stigmatizing this, and as I've gotten older and become one of those old people, things haven't really gotten that much better since the 1990s when I was in high school. There's still a stigma out there. It hasn't improved like I thought it would. I thought my generation would be a lot more understanding and compassionate. And what has actually happened that I'm seeing is that different places are just different. And what I mean by that is this is a big country, and there are parts of the country that I think do a really great job. For whatever reason, it's hard to go into why that might be. But there are other places in our country that are less tolerant, less compassionate, more legalistic.
The South.
It does occur I was thinking it. You can say it out loud. In the southern congregations of churches, and it's not just one denomination, but there does seem to be an old guard that hasn't gone away.
The fundamentalists.
You could call them fundamentalists, and it's not universal. And in fact, even this year there have been some major kind of turning up. This kind of how do you put it? There's been a backlash to that old guard, to that attitude, to some old attitudes, and you're seeing that with regards to race and with regards to women in the church, and I hope that we will figure out a way to be more compassionate. But I grew up in the Bay Area in California, and when I was in high school, I invited a girl from my high school to my church who had a baby. She was a junior in high school, and she had a baby. She was, I think, a little hesitant to come, but when she came, she was treated well. People treated her well. I didn't hear about anybody giving her dirty looks, and and she even came to the youth group a couple of times because she got a babysitter for her baby, and it was a good experience. And I thought, man, this is what it should always be like, everywhere. It would be nice if we could be that way, and not stigmatize people who, for whatever reason, have had a baby.
Or are expecting one.
Yeah. But the pressure there is sometimes whether or not a church is going to be good and compassionate and understanding, there's still pressure for a teenage girl to be seen as righteous, right? And if this thing that has happened is going to make her seem like a wicked or messed up person, there's a lot of pressure just that in her own heart and mind and emotions, and maybe from others as well.
Of course, that's a bit of an issue in the church, besides just in the context of women in the church. That's
true.
That's a church.
That's true.
That's a universal issue for the church. We tend to like appearing. We tend to put a lot of emphasis on our appearances.
Yeah,
we really shouldn't.
Well, because we don't want to acknowledge, or we don't want other people to know about the things that we are ashamed of. That's what happens. And it's a natural human response. I don't want people to know shameful things about me, so I'm going to hide it. Well, you can't hide a pregnancy unless you terminate it.
Right.
And so it's just kind of an extreme version of that same dynamic at play and at work. And so we, as the body of Christ, need to be proactive, I think, in explaining to people that God loves you no matter what you've done, and we do too.
And I do think, I just thought of this right now, but I do think that pastors and church boards especially need to be proactive about this, and be very good at, if there are people in their church who are making folks with an unplanned pregnancy feel ashamed. Mm-hmm. I think it does fall a bit on pastors and church boards to call those people out on mm-hmm. shaming others.
Yeah.
And I know that might be difficult for people in church leadership to confront their fellow Christians about something like that.
Right. Yeah.
But I definitely think it's something that needs to be done if we want to move away from the stigmatization of unplanned pregnancy.
Yeah.
I think we really need to make a very concerted effort as a church, mm-hmm. as a unified worldwide congregation.
Yeah. And I'm a pastor at a church, and I remember many years ago at this church, a teenager got pregnant, and she was counseled here, and she attended here, and she had the baby and brought the baby here, and the baby was in our nursery, and she was a part of our fellowship, and she was still loved, and treated with compassion.
You didn't hear about any cases of people possibly making her feel ashamed? Well,
and it would be great for me to get a hold of her and ask, because I wasn't the one doing the counseling. I was looking as an outsider into what was going on, and from what I saw, things were good. But churches are made up of people, and when you have 100 Christians, it only takes 3 or 4 to give you a dirty look to make you feel judged and want to stay home, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't take a lot of people being judgy and harsh and legalistic to make you feel unwelcome. And that's a tough truth in churches, that even if the church leadership and the pastors and most of the congregation are compassionate, it doesn't take very many what you might call bad apples to turn a person off to church. And that's really sad. That's unfortunate, but it's also, for me as a pastor, how do I deal with that? Especially if I'm not there when when something like that is happening. If I hear about it secondhand later on, it's a very tricky thing to deal with. But yeah, the goal is to recognize, for our churches and for Christians in general, to recognize that there is no sin that God can't forgive, and no sin that is going to cause us to stop loving you. And that's just got to be something that we preach and promote and talk about more.
So, aside from how the church should approach this, I think it might be good to talk about alternatives that the outside world can also promote.
Okay.
Like
alternatives to abortion?
to terminating
Okay.
the baby.
Well, we talked about adoption. What else?
And we discussed the idea that maybe some scientists could get on.
Well, yeah, but short of that, I can't do anything about that.
Right, but stuff we can do now, I guess.
Yeah.
I think something that both the nation and the church should be doing to promote as an alternative to abortion. And this might, for a lot of Christians, this might be a controversial thing to say, but is to promote birth control, promote contraception, pre-pregnancy contraception.
Right, because you have, now then you get into that's another hour long argument, because there are different kinds. And
Wait, there are?
Of contraceptives.
I know there's pills, and I know there's stuff that you put on. And
there's different kinds. There's, well, what they call is, oh boy, I didn't bring my notes for this, and I don't have Google handy. Abort, gosh, I'm going to forget the word. It's a weird word. But stuff that's considered abortive, like abortive methods. And what the idea behind that is that if we believe that new life and personhood happens at contraception.
Conception.
That's right.
You said contraception.
Not contraception. At conception, if new life starts at conception, I just realized how similar those two words are. I didn't know that before. I didn't even think about it. At conception, then any form of contraception that would take place after that moment would be considered abortive, and therefore a sin and murder.
So we need to maybe promote stuff that prevents preconception. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That's also
we're challenging your preconceptions today.
We're challenging
and
English language is what we're doing.
Yeah. So yeah, before
preconception contraception. Oh my goodness. That's gonna try saying that 5 times fast.
It's very interesting. I not until just now have
we should
thought through those words.
I do think that preconception contraceptive measures
there you go. That's
ought to be promoted.
Right.
And I think the church should be promoting stuff like that too. I know there's a bit of, like I said, there's a bit of a stigma about the whole wait to get married or something, or I think it's especially prominent in the Roman Catholic Church.
In terms of what do you mean?
Aren't they a bit more fundamentalist when it comes to birth control?
A little. You could go that route. You could say that. The Roman Catholic Church is ever evolving and changing, and so it's not a monolith, but there are, historically it has been, yeah. But you could say the same for certain Protestant movements as well.
Fair enough.
Most of them are older. Some versions of Puritanism where you really weren't even supposed to have sex unless it was explicitly for having babies.
Right.
And if you're not going to have babies,
don't bother.
Then you're done. Yeah. So there have been those extremes, those fundamentalist extremes. Not the Roman Catholic Church didn't go that far, but they did say no form of birth control is acceptable because you're leaving it to God. You do what humans do, and you leave it to God. And I know people personally that have lived by that. One has 7 kids, and he stuck with it. He's stuck with it and said, you know what? I love each of my 7 kids, and I wouldn't go back and change it. He said, but if I had lived the way that most of the world tells me I should live, some of these kids wouldn't exist. And I was tempted to do that, he said, because you feel like, man, how can I take care of that many children? That was his conviction. and I applaud him for it. In fact, those 7 kids are my cousins, so they're they're all great, and I'm glad they exist. But also, I am not made of the same stuff as my uncle. Maybe some of it, but we have some of the same DNA. But I just don't see myself being capable of promoting a life-giving family and home if I have 7 children in my house.
I think,
if that makes sense.
I do think, like, ideally people wouldn't be hooking up if, like, outside of marriage or
well, because that's the
without
purpose.
having kids.
So now we're actually getting into the purpose of
But
sex itself.
I was
right?
going somewhere with this.
Okay, go ahead.
So ideally that's what it would be, but I think it is good for the church culture and outside culture to promote contraceptives to cover human weakness. Like we do it for disabilities. We make ramps for people who can't walk. We have special ed for people who are on the spectrum, or so why not have measures like this for people who, for one reason or another, surrender to the very obvious and very present temptation.
Right. Yeah. Well, and to be honest, if you look at the statistics, and I haven't looked for a while, but at one time the statistics seem to support the idea that when there is more contraception available, teenage pregnancy went down. And if teenage pregnancy goes down,
obviously abortion is going to go
abortions go down. So depending on how that contraception is operating, kind of is what would base my comfort level. So if it is a kind of contraception that happens after conception, I wouldn't support that, right? Yeah. Theologically, that's murder.
We should probably discourage that.
Right. But on the flip side, you say, well, we do want to do something for the broader culture, especially since so much of our nation is not Christian, to ensure that less abortions happen, and that's one way less abortions would happen. So I see what you're saying, and I think there is some truth in it. It's very sticky. People get very uncomfortable about the different specifics of that.
And there's actually one last topic that I thought to cover, and because I'm sure if we get enough viewers, then someone's bound to bring it up, is what do we do in the cases where the pregnancy's been forced on mom? What if she's been assaulted?
Yeah.
And
So again, there are 2 answers. One is theological. Doesn't matter, it's still murder. Theologically speaking, no matter what, if you are going to abort a child, you have murdered it. You are killing it, you're terminating a life. On the flip side, there is this concession I would make in my heart to the broader culture legally that says, even if we allow abortion in those cases, if we could not allow it in all the others, millions of lives would be saved, right? So to me, it's like, okay, right now we're killing, I'm just throwing out random numbers, these are not accurate, but let's say we kill 1 million babies in a year. And let's say that 1% of those are from rape or incest or something like that, or are threatening the life of the mother. If we allow
1% combined,
I don't know what the number would be combined. It's probably a little higher than that.
I mean, hypothetically.
But let's say hypothetically, it doesn't even matter the number. Let's say 10% combined, which is way high. It's not that much. But if we can cut down abortions by 90%, because I concede that, I would concede that. Does that make sense? If I can cut down abortions 90%, that's great. Now, there are a lot of people that say, well, that's not good enough. We want 100%. Yeah, that would be nice. Theologically speaking, as a person that loves life and wants to support all life, I would love to see.
I think one thing we could do, at least in the cases of rape and incest, is we could. I'm not. Obviously, this won't cut that factor completely out, but we could reduce how many of those happen, since we are definitely the church. I'm tongue-tied today.
Okay, keep going.
The church is necessarily against rape as well.
Well, right.
I think what we can do is encourage the state to make consequences for perpetrating that more severe. Higher jail terms.
Right, yeah.
I think if the jail term was higher and, we didn't have this bro culture. And a lot of the liberal towns and the colleges are trying to work on that.
Yeah,
on the cultural aspect of it.
Yes, which is good. We want that. Yeah.
If we educated that out of people and also made the consequences for raping someone more severe, possibly fewer would happen.
Well, no, probably. Yeah.
Most likely.
Yeah. It would be great if we could eliminate sin. Let's just get rid of sin, and we won't even have these discussions anymore. Nobody's going to be aborting anybody because sin will be gone. And this is the tension, is we're trying to figure out how do we achieve this ideal when there is so much that is messed up, and then how do we deal with the mess without just crushing people and mistreating and condemning. That is the question that we've been asking for decades in the church in America, because sometimes our beliefs cause us to go overboard on condemnation,
right?
And it feels, if you were, we're two guys, but if you're a woman and you really are raped, and you are not, and you have no rights to do anything with the child inside of you, that can feel like everybody is against you. Obviously, I would encourage a woman in that situation, and I would, if I was in a counseling situation, I would encourage her to consider carrying the baby to term, prayerfully consider that this might be a redemption of the evil thing that has happened. That this might be something that God is using to either bless her or bless somebody else. Like I said, there's a waiting list, right, for adoption.
It's the Spiegel principle that we talked about in our bonus video to
the death penalty.
Yeah.
That would be my encouragement, but I would not condemn a person that said no, they can't. They're not willing to do that. Like I couldn't condemn that person. That's a tough decision.
Well, we as Christians aren't supposed to condemn, period.
Right, but we can judge sin as sin. So we're not supposed to. I'm not saying
right.
I can't condemn anybody to hell, but I can.
Right.
I can condemn a sin itself. Not condemn the person, but condemn the sin.
Okay.
Right. So I wouldn't condemn the sin of that person, and I would still call it a sin. If you are raped and you have an abortion, that's still a sin. Like, there's no way around it. You're still killing a baby. But it's a sin that I'm like, well, I kind of understand it, right? Like I can't. I'm not in that position. So,
right.
And this is one of the problems with our belief about sin, is there are times when we
get torn, basically.
We almost feel forced into sin sometimes, and you always have a choice, but sometimes that choice is so hard. And that's the thing that we need to be compassionate about, right? So, tricky subjects. I'm sure I probably ticked off people on both sides of the argument just by opening my mouth. But it's the whole point of this conversation.
I'm sure I did too. So.
The whole point of this conversation. We are. Well, there's nothing you can say that isn't going to make some people upset when you're talking about this issue. The whole point, though, hopefully, is that you hear the views and decide for yourself.
And maybe mull around the possibilities, around the suggestions. And if you guys have any suggestions that you want us to hear, that's what the comments section is for.
Absolutely. And if you invent transporter technology, comment below.
Or invent some way to get the baby to develop somewhere else.
Or find success in eliminating that bro culture, the frat culture. If there's anywhere in the United States that's successful in eliminating that environment and really...
if you can do that, please autograph my t-shirt.
Yeah, that would be amazing. So that's it for now. I think that's all the time we have for.
All right. Take care, y'all. If you like this, click the like button, subscribe. There's a little bell icon somewhere in the video to click if you want to get emails when we post more surprise videos.
And if you hate it, don't comment.
or if you do comment, at least say, hey, here's something you might have missed.
That would be fair. Be civil. Be cool. And let's promote life. That's our whole thing.
Amen.
Yep.
See y'all soon.